There may have been a beginning, but not the kind your mind is trying to imagine, because when we say the beginning of time, we assume something very human, a before and an after, a moment when everything started. But what if that idea itself is the illusion? What if, before time, is not just unknown, but unknowable? And even stranger, what if something did exist, without time at all? Close your eyes for a second. Try to imagine no past, no future, no sequence, no ticking, no waiting, just existence. No change, no motion, no story. Could anything exist like that, or would everything simply collapse into nothing? Because here's the first truth. Time is not just something that passes. Time is what allows things to happen. Without time, there is no cause, no effect, no before, no after. So when we ask, what existed before time began, we might actually be asking something deeper. Can anything exist without change? And this is where the mystery opens, because modern physics suggests something unsettling. Time may not be fundamental. It may not be a basic ingredient of reality. It might be something that emerges like temperature or sound, something that appears only under certain conditions. Which leads us to a question most people have never seriously considered. If time is not fundamental, then what is? And here's where things start to get uncomfortable, because when scientists trace the universe backward, they don't just find a hot, dense beginning, they find a boundary, a place where our equations break, where time itself seems to lose meaning. Not slow down, not reverse, but simply stop applying. And yet, something had to exist. Because from that nothing came everything. So tonight, we're going to follow that edge, not just to the beginning of the universe, but to the place where beginning no longer makes sense. And along the way, three questions will quietly stay with us. If time had a beginning, what caused it? If nothing existed before, how did something appear? And most disturbingly, is it possible that time never truly began at all? Stay with that feeling, because the deeper we go, the less solid reality will feel. At around 1 minute into this journey, there's something small I'll ask of you. If this kind of quiet exploration speaks to you, if you enjoy drifting through ideas that don't rush, that don't shout, then gently let me know. A like, a quiet subscribe. It tells me to keep building these spaces for you. Now, let's go deeper. At first glance, the idea of a beginning seems simple. The universe began. Time began. End of story. But the moment you slow down, you notice something strange hiding inside that sentence. Because every beginning we've ever experienced happens in time. A movie begins at a moment. A day begins at sunrise. A life begins at birth. But all of those beginnings take place within time itself. So what would it even mean for time to begin? It's like asking, what is north of the North Pole? The question sounds valid until you realize the framework itself breaks. And yet, cosmology tells us something very specific. About 13.8 billion years ago, the observable universe was compressed into an incredibly hot, dense state, a state where space itself was smaller, energy was unimaginably concentrated, and the rules we know today were not yet formed. We call this moment the Big Bang. But here's the part most people misunderstand. The Big Bang was not an explosion in space, it was the expansion of space, and with it, the expansion of time. Time didn't exist, and then suddenly started ticking. Instead, time itself was part of the system that expanded. So asking what happened before the Big Bang might be like asking what's outside the universe. It assumes there's a place where there may be none. But scientists didn't stop there, because curiosity doesn't stop at boundaries, it presses harder. And when they pushed the equations further back toward that first moment, something unexpected happened. Time began to behave differently. Not like a straight line, not like a flowing river, but more like a dimension that could bend, warp, and possibly fade. Imagine time as a road. As you travel backward, the road narrows. The further you go, the tighter it becomes, until finally it pinches into a single point. At that point, there is no more road, no direction, no movement, no before. That's what physicists call a singularity. But here's the problem. Singularities don't just mark the beginning of something, they mark the end of our understanding. Because inside a singularity, our laws of physics no longer work. Gravity becomes infinite, density becomes infinite, and time loses definition. So we're left with a strange situation. We can describe the universe almost all the way back, but at the exact moment where time begins, our tools fail. And that leaves a gap, a quiet, unsettling gap. Now, here's where things take a turn, because some physicists believe that gap isn't just a limitation, it's a clue. What if the beginning of time was not a sharp starting point, but a transition? Think about ice melting into water. There's no single instant where ice suddenly becomes water. It's a smooth change, a shift in state. What if time behaved the same way? What if what we call the beginning of time was actually a phase transition from something timeless into something that flows? And if that's true, then something may have existed before time, just not in a way we recognize. Not as events, not as moments, but as possibility. Now, pause here for a second, because this is where the ground starts to move. If there was a state of reality without time, then cause and effect wouldn't exist. Nothing would happen, nothing would change. So how does a timeless state become a universe full of motion? This is the first major mystery, and we won't answer it yet. But we will circle it again and again, because the second mystery is even stranger. If time emerged from something, then maybe time is not the deepest layer of reality. Maybe beneath time, there is something more fundamental, something that doesn't tick, doesn't flow, doesn't move, but still exists. And the third mystery, the one we'll carry all the way through this journey, is this: if time can emerge, can it also disappear? Could there be regions of reality right now where time simply doesn't exist? Hold on to that, because from here we're going to move into something even more unsettling, not just what came before time, but whether time itself is an illusion created by our perception. And if that's true, then the question changes again. Not what existed before time, but what exists when time is removed. And the answer to that may be closer than you think. In the next part, we'll begin to peel apart time itself, not as something we experience, but as something constructed. Because once you see how time might be built, or you'll start to notice something quiet, something almost invisible, running underneath every moment of your life. And once you notice it, you can't unsee it. But for now, just stay here for a moment, right at the edge, where time might not exist at all. And now we begin to take time apart. Because if time is not fundamental, if it is something that emerges, then the next question becomes unavoidable. What is it made of? Think about something simple, a movie. When you sit and watch a film, it feels continuous, smooth, alive, moments flowing into moments. But if you slow it down enough, you realize something strange. A movie is not motion. It's a sequence of still frames. 24 images per second, each one frozen, each one separate. And yet, your mind stitches them together into time. Now, here's the unsettling thought. What if reality works the same way? What if time is not a flowing river, but something constructed from tiny, discrete pieces? Pieces so small, we never notice the gaps. Because at the deepest level of physics, there's a concept called quantization. It means that certain things do not vary smoothly. They come in chunks. Energy comes in packets. Light comes in particles. Even space may have a smallest possible unit. So what about time? Is there a smallest tick, a shortest possible moment? Some theories suggest there is an unimaginably tiny interval called the Planck time, about 10 to the power of minus 43 seconds. That's not just fast, it's beyond anything your intuition can hold. To give you a sense, if you counted every second since the beginning of the universe, you still wouldn't come close into experiencing a single Planck second in full detail. And below that scale, our current physics breaks. So, here's the idea. What if time is built from these tiny, indivisible units, like pixels in an image? From a distance, everything looks smooth, continuous, real. But zoom in far enough, and you start to see the structure. If that's true, then time is not something that flows. It's something that updates, frame by frame by frame. Now, pause here, because this leads to something quietly shocking. If time is made of discrete steps, then between those steps, there is nothing. No change, no motion, no existence in the way we understand it. Which raises a strange possibility. Reality may not be continuous. It may be more like a sequence of moments stitched together into the illusion of flow. And your consciousness, your awareness, might be part of that stitching process. Now, here's where the second layer of the mystery opens. Because even if time is built from tiny units, no, that still doesn't explain why we experience it the way we do. Why does time feel like it moves forward, and why not backward? Why not in all directions at once? Because the laws of physics, at their deepest level, don't actually prefer a direction. If you take most fundamental equations and reverse time, they still work. A particle moving forward obeys the same laws as a particle moving backward. So why does your life only move one way? Why do you remember the past, but not the future? Why does a glass shatter, but never unshatter? This is what physicists call the arrow of time. And it may not come from time itself. It may come from something else entirely. Entropy. Entropy is often described as disorder, but a better way to think about it is the number of possible arrangements. A neat room has fewer possible arrangements. A messy room has many more, and systems naturally evolve from low entropy to high entropy, from order to disorder. Not because they want to, but because there are simply more ways to be disordered than ordered. Now, here's the key. This increase in entropy creates the direction of time. It gives us a past and a future. The past is the state of lower entropy. The future is the state of higher entropy, and your memory, your perception, your sense of flow all align with that gradient. So, in a very real sense, time doesn't flow forward. Entropy does, and we follow it. Now, let that settle for a moment, because this flips something fundamental. Time may not be the thing that drives change. Change may be what creates time. Now, here comes the deeper question. If time emerges from change, then what happens? In a system where nothing changes, would time still exist? Or would it disappear? Imagine a universe, perfectly still, no motion, no energy exchange, no differences, no events. In such a universe, there would be no way to measure time, no clocks, no processes, no before or after. From the inside, it would feel like nothing. And from the outside, it might look like everything frozen. This brings us back to the idea we touched earlier, a timeless state, not empty, not non-existent, but unchanging. And if the early universe began in such a state, then the birth of time may have been the birth of change. Not a ticking clock starting, but a transition from stillness into dynamics. Now, here's the unsettling part. If time depends on change, and change depends on differences, then your experience of time depends on contrast, on memory, on the ability to compare what was to what is, which means time, as you feel it, may not exist independently of you. It may be a feature of perception, not just physics. Now hold on to that, because we're about to step into something even stranger. If time is constructed, if it depends on entropy, if it emerges from change, then it might not be universal. Different parts of reality could experience time differently. In fact, they already do. Near a black hole, time slows down. At high speeds, time stretches. Clocks tick differently, depending on where you are and how you move. So time is not absolute. It's flexible, which leads us to a quiet but powerful idea. There may be no single now, no universal present moment shared by everything. Your now is not the same as someone else's, far away, and at the edge of extreme physics. Now may lose meaning entirely. So, what does that say about the idea of a beginning? If there is no universal now, then the beginning of time may not be a single moment. It could be a boundary, seen differently from different perspectives. And that brings us back to our three questions. If time had a beginning, what caused it? If nothing existed before, how did something appear? And if time is not fundamental, what lies beneath it? We still don't have the answers, not yet, but we're starting to see the shape of the problem. In the next part, we'll move deeper into a place where time doesn't just bend or break, but may loop or disappear entirely. Because some theories suggest The universe didn't begin in the way we think. It may have emerged from something that never needed a beginning at all. And if that's true, then the biggest mystery changes again. Not what came before time, but what kind of reality doesn't need time to exist? And now we step into a place where time doesn't just begin. It might not need to begin at all, because there is a quiet idea, one that doesn't shout, doesn't dominate headlines, but once you hear it, it stays with you. What if the universe never actually started? Not in the way we imagine. No first moment, no absolute beginning, no sharp line between nothing and something. Instead, what if reality is timeless at its core, and what we call the beginning is just the point where time became visible? Pause there, because this flips everything. Up until now, we've been treating the Big Bang as the origin, the start of everything. But what if it wasn't a beginning, but a boundary, a horizon, beyond which the concept of time simply stops making sense, like the edge of a map, not the end of the world, just the end of what we can describe. Now here's where things get interesting. There are models in physics where time doesn't stretch back to a single nukta, but instead curves. Not in space, in time itself. Imagine time not as a straight line, but as a loop. No beginning, no end. Just a continuous structure that folds back on itself. In such a universe, asking what came before becomes meaningless, because there is no before. Every moment is connected, but none is the first. Now take a breath, because this is not just a philosophical idea. Some cosmological models suggest that the universe could be cyclic, expanding, then contracting, again and again, in an endless rhythm. Each Big Bang, not the first, but just the latest, like breathing. Inhale, exhale, repeat. And if that's true, then what we call the beginning of time might simply be the start of this cycle. Not the start of everything, but here's where it becomes even more subtle, because there's another possibility, one that doesn't rely on cycles or loops, but something even quieter. What if time is like a direction that only appears under certain conditions? Think about space. You can move left or right, forward or backward, up or down, but those directions only make sense within space. Now imagine a state of reality where those directions don't exist. Not because they're hidden, but because they're not defined. Some physicists believe that near the origin of the universe, time behaves like that, not as a flowing dimension, but as something that becomes spatial, meaning at the deepest level. Like there may be no distinction between time and space. They blur together. And in that state, there is no before, no after, just a kind of geometric existence, the structure, rather than a story. This idea is sometimes described as a timeless universe, where reality exists as a whole, not unfolding, not evolving, but simply being. Now here's the mini shift, the one that quietly changes everything. If reality is timeless at its core, then what you experience as time may not be a property of the universe itself. It may be a property of how you move through it, like reading a book. The entire story exists at once, every page, every chapter, the beginning, the ending, all of it, already there. But you experience it one line at a time. You call that experience gone time sky. Now imagine this. What if the universe is like that book? A complete structure where every moment already exists, and your consciousness is what moves through it, creating the sensation of time. Not because time flows, but because you do. Now sit with that, because it introduces something known as the block universe. In this view, past, present, and future all exist equally. There is no special now, no moving present moment, just a vast four-dimensional structure where every event is fixed within space-time, and your awareness traces a path through it, giving rise to the feeling that time is passing. But in reality, nothing is moving. Everything simply is. Now, here comes the deeper discomfort. If that's true, then the question, what existed before time, changes again, because there is no before, only regions of a structure that do not contain time as we experience it. So, instead of asking, what came before, we should ask, what kind of reality contains both time and the absence of time? Now, hold that question, because we're not going to answer it yet. We're going to circle it again. Because there's still something missing. Even if the universe is timeless, even if all moments exist at once, we still haven't explained something crucial. Why does it feel like time flows? Why do you experience a now moving forward? Why does the future feel open and the past feel fixed? This is where physics meets something more intimate, consciousness. Because whatever time is, your experience of it is deeply tied to how your mind works. Your brain doesn't perceive everything at once. It processes information in sequences. It builds memories. It compares what just happened to what is happening now. And from that comparison, it constructs a sense of flow. So, the passage of time may not be something happening out there. It may be something generated in here. Now here's the unsettling part. If your sense of time comes from memory, then without memory, time would collapse. There would be no past, no continuity, no story, just a single eternal present. Which raises a question that we've been avoiding. If the universe existed before time, in some timeless state, then what triggered the first moment? What caused the shift from timeless structure to flowing experience? Was it physics? Was it a fluctuation? Was it inevitable? Or was there never a shift at all? What if time has always existed, but only appears under certain conditions, like a shadow that only forms when light hits at the right angle? Now we arrive at the edge of something profound, because the next step is not just about time or the universe or physics. It's about reality itself. In the next part, we're going to explore a possibility that sounds almost impossible until you follow it carefully. What if the universe didn't begin from nothing or from something, but from information? Not matter, not energy, but something more abstract. Because if time is not fundamental, then maybe neither is reality as we perceive it. And once you see that, the question changes one last time. Not what existed before time, but what must exist for time to appear at all. And now we arrive at something even quieter, but far more unsettling. What if reality, at its deepest level, is not made of things, not particles, not energy, not even space or time, but information? Not information in the way you think of it, not words, not data on a screen, but something more fundamental. A pattern, a structure, a set of relationships that define what can exist. Because when physicists look deeper and deeper, they begin to notice something strange. Particles are not solid objects. They're excitations, ripples in underlying fields, and those fields are defined mathematically. Meaning, at the deepest level, reality behaves less like stuff and more like a system of rules, a kind of code. Now pause here, because this introduces a radical idea. If reality is built on information and then time itself may be a feature of how information changes, not a background, not a stage, but a consequence. Think about a computer. Inside, everything is just bits, zeros, and ones. Nothing moves, nothing flows. Aye, but when the system updates, when the state changes, you see motion, you see time. Now, imagine something similar, but infinitely more complex. The universe is a vast informational structure where each moment is a configuration and time is the sequence of transitions between configurations. Now, here comes the first shift. If time depends on changes in information, then without change, there is no time. We've seen that before, but now it has a deeper meaning, because it suggests that time is not fundamental. It's derivative. It emerges when information evolves. Now, here's the mini hook, the one that quietly opens a new door. What if the universe didn't start with matter or energy, but with a rule that defines how information can exist and transform? And from that rule, everything else follows. Space, time, particles, you. Not as separate creations, but as consequences. Now let's go deeper. There's a concept in physics called quantum information. At the smallest scales, the universe doesn't behave like solid objects. It behaves like probabilities. A particle is not in one place until it's observed. It exists in a range of possibilities, and what determines the outcome is not just the particle itself, but the information available about it. This leads to a strange conclusion. Reality is not just made of things, it's made of what can be known and what cannot. Now, here's where things begin to blur. If reality is information and time is the evolution of information, then what we call the beginning of time may actually be the first moment. Information became structured, not created, structured. Because before that, there may have been pure potential. No defined states, no distinctions, just possibility. Now, try to imagine that. A state where nothing is fixed. Nothing is determined. Not even time. And then something changes. Not in time, but in structure. A rule, a constraint, a relationship emerges, and suddenly information has form. Differences appear, and with differences comes change, and with change comes time. So time may not have been born in the way we think. It may have crystallized like a pattern forming in a fluid. Now here's where the second layer of mystery opens. If reality is informational, then where is it stored? Not in space, because space is part of the system. Not in time, because time emerges from it. So where? This question has led some physicists to a surprising idea, that the universe is not something that exists in space and time, but something from which space and time emerge, like a deeper layer, sometimes described as a quantum state or a wave function of the universe, a mathematical object that contains all possible configurations, and from that object our familiar reality appears. Now, here's the unsettling part. If that's true, then what you experience as reality is not the full picture. It's a projection, a slice, a particular way of organizing, a much deeper structure. And time is part of that projection, not the foundation. Now hold that, because it connects to something even more surprising. If reality is information, then information cannot be destroyed. It can change form, it can spread, it can become harder to access. But fundamentally, it remains. This idea appears in black hole physics. When something falls into a black hole, it seems to disappear. But according to modern theory, the information about it is not lost. It's encoded in subtle ways. Now extend that idea. If information is never destroyed, then every moment, every configuration, every state of the universe still exists in some form, not in time, but in structure, which brings us back to the block universe idea, but deeper. Not just that all moments exist, but that they are all encoded in a timeless informational structure. Now here comes the third question, the one we've been circling. If all states exist and time is just how we move through them, then what determines the path? Why this sequence and not another? Why does your experience follow this specific chain of moments? Is it fixed? Is it flexible? Or is it something else entirely? We won't answer that yet. But we will approach it. Because before we can understand the path, we need to understand something more fundamental. Why does anything exist at all? Why is there information instead of nothing? Because if time is not fundamental and space is not fundamental and matter is not fundamental, then the deepest layer of reality may be something even more abstract, something that doesn't exist in the way we usually mean, but still gives rise to everything. In the next part, we're going to move into one of the most difficult ideas in modern physics, the concept of nothing, not empty space, not a vacuum, but true nothing, and why that kind of nothing may be impossible, because if nothing cannot exist, then something must. And if something must exist, then the beginning of time may not be a mystery of origin, but a necessity, a consequence of deeper rules we are only just beginning to see. So, the question shifts again. Not what existed before time, but why is there anything at all for time to emerge from? And now we approach something that sounds simple, but may be the most difficult idea of all. Nothing. Not empty space, not darkness, not silence, because all of those are still something. Empty space has structure. Darkness is the absence of light. Silence is the absence of sound. But true nothing means no space, no time, no energy, no laws, No structure, no possibility. Now, pause here, because the moment you try to imagine that, something strange happens. Your mind fails. You always end up imagining a kind of empty space, a void, a black background. But that's not nothing. That's still a stage. True nothing has no stage. And this is where the problem begins. Because in physics, nothing is not what we usually think it is. Even the emptiest vacuum is not truly empty. It's filled with fluctuations, tiny, random changes in energy. Particles appear and disappear in incredibly short timescales, like ripples in a field that never fully rests. This is called quantum vacuum fluctuation. And it suggests something profound. Even when you remove everything, something remains. Not matter, not particles, but the potential for them to exist. Now, here comes the first shift. If the vacuum is never truly empty, then nothing, as we imagine it, may not exist, not physically. And if true nothing cannot exist, then something must always exist. Now sit with that, because it removes one of the most basic assumptions we carry. We tend to think that nothing is the default, that the universe appeared from a state of nothingness. But what if the opposite is true? What if something is the default, and nothing is the impossible state? Now, here's the mini hook, the one that quietly reframes everything. If nothing is impossible, then the question is no longer, why is there something rather than nothing? But instead, how could there ever be nothing at all? Now, let's go deeper. Some physicists propose that the universe could emerge from quantum fluctuations, not from absolute nothing, but from a kind of almost nothing. A state with no particles, but with underlying laws. And within that state, tiny fluctuations can give rise to entire universes, not metaphorically, literally, because at very small scales, energy can appear temporarily, as long as it disappears quickly enough and under certain conditions. Those fluctuations can become stable, expanding, growing, becoming a universe. Now, here's the unsettling part. This means the universe may not need a cause in the traditional sense. It may be a natural consequence of the rules themselves, like a pattern that inevitably forms when conditions allow. Now, connect this back to time. If the universe emerged from a quantum fluctuation, then time itself may have emerged with it, not before. So again, there is no before time, only a transition from a state without time to a state with time. But here's where things become even more subtle. Because even this quantum vacuum is not truly nothing. It still has structure. It still obeys rules. So we're pushed one level deeper. Where do those rules come from? Why do they exist? Why these laws and not others? Now we arrive at the edge of explanation. Because physics can describe how the universe behaves, but when we ask why those laws exist, we step into something more philosophical, or perhaps something even more fundamental. Now, hold that question, because there's another path, another way of looking at this. What if the universe doesn't need a reason to exist? What if existence is simply necessary, not caused, not created, but inevitable? Some theories suggest that all possible universes exist. Every consistent set of rules, every mathematical structure is real, in some sense, and our universe is just one of them. Not special, not unique, just consistent. Now, here's the deeper implication. If all possible structures exist, then there is no need for a beginning, because existence is not something that starts. It's something that simply is, and time is just one feature that appears in some of those structures, including ours. Now, pause again, because we've quietly arrived at a completely different picture. The universe did not emerge from nothing. It emerged from possibility, and possibility may not need a beginning. Now, here comes the third question, and the one that ties everything together. If something must exist, and time emerges from structure, and reality is informational, then what determines which structures become real to us? Why this universe? Why these laws? Why this experience? We still don't have the answer, but we're getting closer to the shape of it. Because in the next part, we're going to explore something even more unsettling. The idea that reality may not be continuous at all. That, beneath everything, there may be a kind of cosmic code, not metaphorically, but literally. And if that's true, then time, space, and even existence may be outputs, not foundations. So the question shifts again, not what existed before time, not even why is there something, but what kind of system produces a universe where time can appear and disappear like a shadow. And now we move into something that feels almost impossible, but quietly sits beneath everything we've said so far. What if reality is not continuous at all, not a smooth fabric, not an unbroken flow, but something discrete, something closer to code? Not in the sense of a computer simulation necessarily, Steve, but in structure. Because when physicists push deeper, beyond particles, beyond fields, beyond space-time itself, they begin to encounter a strange idea that the universe may be built from fundamental units of information, not infinitely divisible, but finite, like bits. Now pause here, because this is where intuition starts to slip. We're used to thinking of space as continuous. You can always divide a distance into smaller and smaller pieces. But what if you can't? What if there is a smallest possible length, a smallest pixel of space, and similarly a smallest unit of time? A fundamental resolution beyond which reality cannot be divided. If that's true, then reality is not like a smooth video. It's more like a digital display. At normal scales, everything looks seamless, but underneath, there is a grid, a structure. Now, here comes the first mini shift. If space and time are discrete, then motion itself is not continuous. Nothing truly moves. Instead, things update. Position to position, state to state, like frames in a simulation. Now, let that settle. Because this leads to a quietly radical idea. The universe may not evolve smoothly. It may compute. Each moment not flowing from the last, but being generated according to rules. Now, here's where things become even more interesting. In computer science, complex patterns can emerge from very simple rules. Think about a grid of cells. Each cell can be on or off. With just a few simple rules, you can create structures that move, grow, interact, even though nothing is truly alive. This is known as a cellular automaton. And some scientists have wondered, what if the universe works in a similar way? Simple, underlying rules, producing the complexity we see, not by design, but by necessity. Now, here's the unsettling part. If reality is rule-based, then everything, from galaxies to your thoughts, could be the result of underlying processes you never see. Not controlled, but generated. Now, connect this back to time. If the universe updates step by step, then time may simply be the count of those updates. Not something that flows, but something that ticks, like a clock you can never directly observe. Now, here comes the deeper question. What determines the rules? Why these rules, and not others? Because if the rules were even slightly different, reality itself would be completely unrecognizable. No atoms, no stars, no structure. So why does this system produce a universe like ours? We don't know. But there's a clue hidden in something unexpected: efficiency. Some physicists believe that the universe may favor the simplest possible rules, aids that can generate complexity, not because it chooses to, but because simple rules are more stable, more consistent, more likely to exist. Now pause again, because this connects to something even deeper. If reality is built on rules, and those rules generate information and time emerges from the updating of that information, then time itself is not fundamental. It is a byproduct of computation. Now, here comes the mini hook, the one that quietly reframes your entire experience. What if the passage of time is not something happening to you, but something being generated with you? Not outside, but as part of the process. Now think about your perception. You never experience every detail of reality. Your brain filters, simplifies, constructs. It builds a model of the world. And that model updates over time. So your sense of now may be tied to how quickly your brain updates its internal model, not to some external universal clock, which means time, as you experience it, is partly internal, constructed. Now, here's where things get even more subtle. If both reality and your perception are based on updates, then your experience of time may be synchronized with the underlying structure of the universe, not perfectly, but closely enough to feel continuous. Now imagine if that synchronization changed, if your perception sped up or slowed down relative to the underlying updates, time would feel different, longer, shorter, distorted. And in extreme conditions, this actually happens. Time feels slower in moments of danger, faster in routine, because your brain is processing differently. So even your subjective time is flexible. Now take that idea and extend it outward. If time is not fundamental, if it emerges from updates, if reality is discrete, then the universe itself may not have a single timeline. There could be multiple possible sequences, multiple ways. The updates could unfold, and what you experience is just one path. Now, Here comes the deeper discomfort. If the universe is rule-based and evolves step by step, then is everything predetermined? Is every moment already fixed by the rules? Or is there room for unpredictability, for choice, for something we might call freedom? We don't have a clear answer, because at the quantum level, there is randomness. Outcomes are not fully determined, they follow probabilities. But whether that randomness is truly fundamental, or just a reflection of deeper rules we don't yet understand, remains an open question. Now, we return to our three guiding questions. If time had a beginning, what caused it? If nothing existed before, how did something appear? And if reality is rule-based, what determines the rules themselves? We're getting closer, because in the next part, we're going to explore something even more unsettling. Not just that time may be constructed, or discrete, or emergent, but that it may not be flowing at all, that the feeling of time passing could be a kind of illusion, not false, but incomplete. Because if all moments exist, and reality is a structure, then nothing is moving. And yet, you feel movement, you feel change, you feel time. So the question becomes sharper, not what is time, but who or what is experiencing it. And now we arrive at something that feels almost personal. Because up to this point, we've been talking about time as if it exists out there, in the universe, in physics, in equations. But what if the most important part of time is not out there at all? What if it's in here, or inside your experience? Because no matter how we describe time, there's one thing we can't ignore. You feel it. You feel the present. You remember the past. You anticipate the future. Time is not just something you measure, it's something you live. Now pause here, because this leads to a question that is rarely asked, but impossible to avoid. If time is an illusion, who is experiencing the illusion? And what kind of process creates the feeling of now? Let's begin with something simple. Your brain never actually experiences reality in real time. There is always a delay. Light enters your eyes, signals travel through neurons. Your brain processes the information. By the time you become aware of something, it has already happened. And yet, you don't experience a delay. You experience a seamless present. Now here's the strange part. Your brain doesn't just process the present, it also predicts. It constantly guesses what will happen next, and then compares that prediction to incoming information. So your experience of now is not a single moment. It's a constructed window, a blend of recent past and expected future. Now, let that settle, because it means the present moment is not a precise point. It's a process, and that process creates the feeling of time flowing. Now here comes the first mini-shift. If your sense of time comes from how your brain processes information, then time, as you experience it, is partly a construction, not entirely objective. Now think about this. When you're bored, time feels slow. When you're engaged, time feels fast. When you're afraid, time can feel like it stretches, but the clock doesn't change. Only your perception does, which means there are multiple times existing at once, physical time and experienced time, and they don't always match. Now, Here's where things become deeper. Your brain builds your sense of time using memory. Without memory, there is no past. Without anticipation, there is no future. So, your experience of time depends on your ability to store and compare information, which means time, as you feel it, is tied to identity, to continuity, to the idea that you are the same person from one moment to the next. Now pause again, because this introduces something unsettling. What if that continuity is also constructed? What if your sense of being a continuous self is part of the same process that creates time? Now imagine this. Instead of a continuous stream, your consciousness is more like a sequence, moment to moment, each one connected, but not identical, like frames in a film, and your brain stitches them together into a narrative, a story, a self. And time is the structure that holds that story together. Now, here comes the deeper question. If the sense of time and the sense of self are both constructed, then what is actually fundamental? What is underneath both of them? We don't have a clear answer, but we can start to see the outline of something. Something that does not change, something that observes. Now, here's the mini-hook, the one that quietly shifts everything inward. What if time only exists when there is something to experience change? No observer, no experienced time. Now, this doesn't mean the universe disappears without observers, but it suggests that time as a lived experience requires a certain kind of system, a system that can remember, compare, anticipate. In other words, a system like you. Now let's connect this back to the universe. If time emerges from change and experienced time emerges from perception, then there are layers of time. Physical processes create sequences, and conscious systems interpret those sequences as flow. Now here's where it becomes even more subtle. In some interpretations of physics, the universe as a whole does not evolve in time. It simply exists as a complete structure. But within that structure, there are subsystems like your brain that experience change, and from that, time appears. So time may not be a property of the entire universe. It may be a property of parts of it. Now, sit with that, because it means the beginning of time might not be a universal event. It could be something that emerges whenever certain conditions are met, wherever there is change and memory and comparison. Time appears. Now we return to our three guiding questions. If time had a beginning, what caused it? If nothing existed before, how did something appear? And now a new one quietly joins them. If time depends on perception, then what kind of system is required to experience it? We're getting closer, because in the next part, we're going to explore something even more unsettling. Not just that time may be constructed or perceived, but that the distinction between past, the present, and future may not be real at all, that all moments may exist equally. And what you call now may be just one position in a much larger structure. Because if that's true, then the biggest mystery changes again. Not what came before time, but why are you here in this moment instead of any other? And now we arrive at one of the most unsettling possibilities of all. What if the past, the present, and the future all exist at the same time? Not metaphorically, not philosophically, but physically. Because if time is not fundamental, if it doesn't flow, if it emerges from structure, then there may be no reason for only one moment to exist. Instead, every moment could be equally real. Now, pause, because this is where intuition begins to resist. You feel like you are moving through time, from yesterday to today to tomorrow. But what if that feeling is not because time moves, but because you do, not physically, but in terms of experience? Let's return to the idea of the block universe. Imagine reality, not as something unfolding, but as something already complete. A vast structure, every event, every moment, every version of you, all laid out within space-time, like a landscape. Now imagine your consciousness as a point moving along a path through that landscape. You don't see the whole structure, you only see the slice you are currently passing through. And that slice feels like now. Now, here comes the first mini shift. If all moments already exist, then the future is not something that hasn't happened yet. It is something you haven't experienced yet. Let that settle. Because it changes the meaning of everything. Your tomorrow may already be part of the structure, just as fixed as your yesterday. Now, here's where it gets uncomfortable. If that's true, then what about choice? What about free will? If the future already exists, are your decisions already determined? Or is there another layer we're missing? We won't answer that yet, but we will circle it. Because first, we need to understand something deeper. Why does it feel like the present is special? Why does now feel different from the past or the future? Because in a block universe, there is no objective now, no universal present moment. Every point in space-time exists equally. So, why do you experience one moment as real and the others as memory or possibility? The answer may lie in how information is organized. Your brain. It does not have access to all moments, it only has access to a specific slice. And within that slice, it contains records of what we call the past, memories. But it does not contain records of what we call the future. So from your perspective, the past feels fixed because it is recorded. The future feels open because it is not. But in the structure itself, both may already exist. Now here comes the second mini-hook. What if the difference between past and future is not in reality, but in information? What if the past is simply the part of the structure, encoded in your current state, and the future is the part that is not? Now take a breath. Because this reframes time in a very subtle way. Time may not be about events happening. It may be about information being accessible. Now, let's go deeper. In physics, there is a concept called correlation. It means that different parts of a system contain information about each other. Your current state contains information about your past, the arrangement of atoms in your brain, the memories you carry, the structure of your body, all encode what has already happened. But they do not encode what will happen. So from the inside, time appears to flow from less information about the future to more information about the past. But from the outside, everything is already there. Now, here comes the third shift. If all moments exist, and your experience is just a path through them, then the question becomes, what determines the path? Why this sequence of moments instead of another? Is it fixed? Is it chosen? Or is it something like a probability distribution where multiple paths are possible? Now, we begin to approach the edge of another idea. In quantum mechanics, a system can exist in multiple states at once, a superposition. And only when it is observed does it appear as a single outcome. Now imagine applying that idea to the universe itself. Not just particles, but entire histories. Multiple possible sequences of events existing simultaneously. And what you experience is one branch, one path through a vast landscape of possibilities. Now pause here, because this leads to something profound. The universe may not be a single story. It may be a collection of all possible stories, and time is how a particular story is experienced. Now, here comes the deeper discomfort. If multiple paths exist, then there may be versions of you following different paths, different choices, different outcomes, all equally real within the structure. Now, we won't go too far into that yet, but hold on to the feeling, because it connects to something even deeper. If time is not flowing and all moments exist, and your experience is a path, then the beginning of time is not a universal event. It is simply the point where your path begins. And beyond that point, there may be other regions of the structure that you do not access, not before, just elsewhere. Now we return again to our guiding questions. If time had a beginning, what caused it? If nothing existed before, how did something appear? And now, if all moments exist, what does it mean to move through them? We're very close now to something deeper than time itself, because in the next part, we're going to explore a possibility that feels almost paradoxical, that time may not just be an illusion, but a useful one, a necessary one, something that reality creates so that complexity and consciousness can exist. Because without time, there is no story. And without story, there may be no experience at all. So the question shifts again. Not, is time real? But why does reality need the illusion of time in the first place? And now we arrive at a question that feels almost backwards. What if time is not a fundamental feature of reality, but a tool? Not something the universe has, but something it uses. Because if you step back far enough and imagine a reality with no time, something strange happens. Nothing changes. No movement, no growth, no cause and effect. Everything simply exists, perfectly still. Now here's the problem. In such a reality, complexity cannot unfold. No stars form, no atoms combine, no life emerges, because all of those require sequence, a before and an after. So if reality were truly timeless, it would also be featureless, static, and yet the universe we observe is anything but static. It evolves, it builds structure, from simple beginnings to incredible complexity. Now here comes the first mini shift. What if time is the mechanism that allows complexity to exist, not just something that measures change, but something that enables it. Now, think about this. If all moments exist at once, in a timeless structure, then nothing is happening. But if you experience those moments in sequence, then suddenly there is a story. There is cause and effect. There is evolution. So time may be the way a static structure becomes a dynamic experience. Now pause here, because this suggests something profound. Reality may be timeless at its deepest level, but time is what allows that reality to be experienced as something alive. Now here comes the second mini hook. What if time is not an illusion to be removed, but a necessary illusion that makes experience possible? Now let's go deeper. Think about a piece of music. All the notes exist as a structure. You could write them down all at once, but music is not experienced all at once. It unfolds, note by note. And it is that unfolding that creates emotion, meaning, experience. If you heard every note simultaneously, there would be no melody, only noise. Now, apply that to reality. The universe may be like a complete composition, and time is how it is played. Now, here comes the deeper layer. If time is the unfolding of structure, then the direction of time matters. Why does it move forward? Why not backward? Why not randomly? We touched on this before with entropy. But now we can see it differently. Entropy doesn't just give direction to time. It gives direction to experience, from simpler states to more complex ones, from low information to high information, from uniform to structured. Now, here's the subtle shift. Time may be the process by which information becomes meaningful, because information without sequence is just possibility. But information unfolded over time becomes story. Now think about your own life. Your memories are not just data. They are ordered. They form a narrative, a sense of identity. Without that sequence, you wouldn't have a self. You would just be a collection of disconnected states. Now, pause again, because this connects time directly to meaning. Without time, there is no meaning, only structure. Now, here comes the third mini hook. What if the universe uses time to transform structure into experience? Now, let's connect this back to our deeper questions. If time emerges from information and enables complexity, then the beginning of time may not be a random event. It may be a necessary condition for something deeper, for structure to be experienced, for reality to unfold. Now here's where it becomes even more interesting. If time is necessary for experience, then any system capable of experience must exist within time, which means time and consciousness may be deeply linked, not identical, but connected. Because without time, there is no sequence, and without sequence, there is no awareness. Now, hold that thought, because it leads to something unexpected. If time is what allows experience, then removing time would not reveal a deeper truth. It would remove experience entirely. So perhaps the goal is not to escape time, but to understand why it exists. Now we return again to our three guiding questions. If time had a beginning, what caused it? If nothing existed before, How did something appear? And now, why does reality need time at all? We are getting closer, because in the next part, we're going to explore something that feels almost paradoxical. The idea that time may not just be necessary, but limited. That there may be edges to time, boundaries where it breaks down, and beyond those boundaries, something else takes over. Something that does not flow, does not change, does not evolve, but still exists. So the question shifts one more time. Not what is time, but what lies beyond it when it finally disappears. And now we approach the edge. Not the edge of space, not the edge of knowledge, but the edge of time itself. Because if time is not fundamental, if it emerges, if it depends on change, then there must be places where it breaks, where it stops, where it no longer applies. Now pause, and because this is not just theory, physics already points to such places. The most extreme example is a black hole. Near a black hole, time behaves differently. From far away, everything seems normal, but as you get closer, something strange happens. Time begins to slow, not just a little, dramatically. To an outside observer, an object falling into a black hole appears to slow down more and more, never quite reaching the edge, frozen. But for the object itself, time feels normal. It crosses the boundary without noticing anything special. Now, here comes the first mini shift. Time is not the same everywhere. It depends on where you are, on gravity, on motion. So already, time is not universal. Now let's go deeper. At the center of a black hole, the equations predict something extreme, a singularity, a point where density becomes infinite, where space collapses, and time, as we understand it, ceases to exist, not slows, not stretches, ends. Now hold that, because this is one of the few places where physics directly suggests a boundary of time. But there's another, the beginning of the universe. As we trace time backward toward the Big Bang, we approach a similar limit, a point where our equations fail, where time loses meaning. So, we have two edges, the beginning and the singularity, two places where time breaks down. Now here comes the second mini hook. What if these edges are not accidents, but clues? Clues that time is not a continuous background, but something that exists only within certain conditions. Now imagine this. Time exists inside the universe, but not outside it, just like temperature exists inside a system, but not for the system as a whole. Now pause again, because this reframes everything. If time only exists within the universe, then asking what came before the universe is like asking what is colder than absolute zero. The question itself breaks. Now, here comes the deeper layer. Some theories suggest that space and time are not fundamental, but emerge together from something deeper, a more basic structure, and at extreme conditions, like black holes or the early universe, that structure becomes visible. Time dissolves back into its underlying form. Now, here comes the third shift. What if time is like a phase, like water? At certain conditions, water flows, At others, it freezes or evaporates. The substance is the same, but the behavior changes. What if time is a phase of reality that only exists under certain conditions? Now let that settle, because it means there could be regions of reality right now where time does not exist. Not in the past, not before the universe, but beyond certain boundaries. Now, here comes the deeper question. What is reality like without time? No sequence, no cause and effect, no change. Not because things are frozen, but because change no longer has meaning. Now, try to imagine that. Not a still image, but something beyond motion, entirely. This is where language begins to fail, because all our concepts depend on time. Now, here's the unsettling part. If time can disappear, then everything we experience is limited, local, a feature of certain conditions, not a universal truth. Now we return to our guiding questions. If time had a beginning, what caused it? If nothing existed before, how did something appear? And now, what exists when time ends? We don't have a complete answer, but we can start to see a pattern. Time appears when there is structure, change, information flow, and disappears when those conditions break down. Now, here comes the final mini hook for this part. What if the universe is not entirely inside time, but only partially? What if time is just a layer on top of something deeper? And what we call reality is only the part where that layer exists. Now hold that, because in the next part, we're going to explore something even more unsettling. Not just where time ends, but what happens to reality when it does. Does everything stop? Does everything still exist? Or does the question itself no longer make sense? Because once you remove time, you don't just remove change. You remove the framework that allows questions to be asked at all. So the mystery shifts again, not what is beyond time, but can anything be said about a reality where time never existed in the first place? And now we step into a place where even questions begin to dissolve, because once time disappears, something deeper happens. Not just to reality, but to meaning itself. Up until now, every idea we've explored has depended on time, cause and effect, before and after, beginning and end, but without time, none of these exist. So what happens to reality when those ideas are gone? Pause here, because this is where the mind tries to hold on to something familiar. We imagine a frozen universe, a still frame, but that's not correct. A frozen moment still exists in time. It's just not changing. But a truly timeless state is something else entirely. It's not frozen. It's beyond the concept of state itself, because a state implies a moment, and without time, there are no moments. Now, here comes the first mini-shift. Without time, there is no happening, only being, not static, not dynamic, just complete. Now let that settle, because this leads to something subtle but profound. Reality without time is not a sequence. It is a totality. Everything, not spread out, but unified. Now, here comes the second mini hook. What if the deepest layer of reality is not something that unfolds, but something that is already whole. Now, let's try to approach this carefully. Imagine a mathematical object, a perfect shape. It doesn't change. It doesn't evolve. It simply exists. All its properties, all its relationships are contained within it. Now imagine that reality, at its deepest level, is something like that, not made of parts moving through time, but made of relationships, existing all at once. Now here's where it becomes difficult, because our minds are built to think in sequences. We understand by steps, but this kind of reality has no steps, no progression, so we can't fully picture it. We can only circle it. Now, here comes the third shift. If reality is timeless at its core, then time is not the foundation. It is a perspective, a way of slicing that deeper whole into something we can experience, like taking a cross-section of a larger structure. Each slice feels like a moment, and moving between slices feels like time. Now pause again, because this connects directly to everything we've been building. The block universe, the idea of information, the emergence of time, they all point to the same possibility. That time is not out there, flowing, but something that appears when a timeless structure is experienced in parts. Now here comes the deeper question. If reality is a complete whole, then why do we experience it piece by piece? Why not all at once? Why this limited perspective? We don't fully know, but there are hints. Because experiencing everything at once would not be experience. It would be indistinguishable, like hearing every sound at the same time, like seeing every frame of a movie stacked together. There would be no distinction, no meaning. So perhaps this fragmented experience is necessary, not a limitation, but a condition for awareness. Now let that settle, and because it suggests something quietly profound, time may be the way. A timeless reality becomes knowable. Now, here comes the deeper mini hook. What if time exists, not for the universe, but for observers? Now let's connect this back into our core questions. If time had a beginning, what caused it? If nothing existed before, how did something appear? And now, what is reality? When time is removed completely, we're beginning to see that these questions may not have answers in the way we expect, because they assume a framework that may not apply. Before, after, cause. All of these depend on time. And if time is not fundamental, then the questions themselves begin to unravel. Now, here comes the final shift of this part. Instead of asking, what came before time, we may need to ask, what kind of reality does not require time at all? And what kind of perspective creates it? Because in the next part, we're going to explore something even more unsettling. Not just that time may not be fundamental, but that our entire understanding of reality may be limited by the way we experience it. That there may be aspects of reality we can never perceive, not because they are hidden, but because they do not fit within time. And if that's true, then the biggest mystery is no longer about the universe. It's about us, about the kind of beings that can only understand reality one moment at a time. So, the question shifts again. Not what is beyond time, but What kind of mind would be required to perceive a reality where time does not exist at all? And now we turn the question inward one last time, because after everything we've explored, something subtle begins to emerge. Maybe the deepest mystery is not time. It's the kind of mind trying to understand it. Because every idea we've used, every metaphor, every explanation has depended on something very specific. Sequence, step by step, before, then after, cause, then effect. But what if that way of thinking is not just a limitation, but a filter, a constraint built into how we experience reality? Now pause here, because this leads to a question that feels almost impossible. What would it be like to perceive reality without time? Not to imagine it, but to actually experience it. Now, here comes the first mini-shift. A mind without time would not think in sequences. It would not have memory, as we understand it. It would not anticipate or predict, because all of those require before and after. Instead, it would perceive everything at once, not as a stream, but as a whole. Now try to feel that. Not moments unfolding, but a complete structure, fully present. No waiting, no change, no movement, just total awareness. Now here's the problem. For us, that kind of awareness is almost impossible to grasp, because our brains are built to process information over time, neuron by neuron, signal by signal. We are sequential beings. So even when we try to imagine a timeless perception, we turn it into a sequence. We say, first this, then that. But a timeless mind would not have first or then. Now, here comes the second mini-hook. What if there are aspects of reality we can never truly understand because they cannot be experienced within time? Now, let that settle. Because this is not just philosophical, it has real consequences for how far science can go. Science depends on measurement, and measurement depends on change. You measure something by observing how it evolves over time. So, if there are parts of reality that do not change, that do not evolve, that do not exist in time, then they may be fundamentally unmeasurable, not hidden, not distant, but inaccessible to any method we have. Now, here comes the deeper shift. This doesn't mean those aspects don't exist. It means they may exist outside the kind of reality we can observe. Now pause again, because this reframes the limits of knowledge, not as a temporary barrier, but as something structural, a boundary defined by the nature of time and the nature of our minds. Now, here comes the third mini-hook. What if the ultimate truth of reality is not something we can discover, but something we can only approach? Now let's connect this back to everything we've explored. Time may not be fundamental. It may emerge from change, from information, from structure, and our experience of time may emerge from how our minds process that structure. So both the universe and our perception are layered, and time exists in the middle of those layers, not at the bottom. Now, here's the deeper question. If we cannot step outside time to observe reality directly, then how do we know what is truly fundamental? We build models, mathematics, abstract structures that don't rely on time in the same way. And sometimes those models hint at something deeper, something timeless, but we always interpret them through time. So there is always a gap between what is and what we can understand. Now sit with that, because it leads to something quietly profound. The mystery of time may never be fully solved, not because it is too complex, but because we are part of it. We are inside the system, trying to understand the system. Now, here comes the final shift of this part. Instead of asking, what existed before time, or what is beyond time, we might ask, what is the simplest thing that must exist for time and experience to appear at all? Because that question does not rely on before or after. It points directly to the foundation. And in the next part, we're going to follow that question as far as it can go. Not into time, not beyond time, but beneath it, towards something so simple, so abstract, that it might be the closest thing to a true beginning, or perhaps something that never needed a beginning at all. So the mystery shifts one last time. Not when did time begin, but what is the minimum that must exist for a universe with time to be possible? And now we arrive at the quietest question of all. Not what happened first, not what came before, not even why does anything exist, but something simpler. What is the minimum that must exist for everything else to appear? Pause here, because this question does something subtle. It removes time, it removes sequence, it removes cause, and it asks, instead, what is required? Not before the universe, but beneath it. Now, here comes the first mini-shift. If time is not fundamental, and space is not fundamental, and matter is not fundamental, then the foundation of reality must be something that does not depend on any of them. Something that can exist without location, without duration, without change. Now try to imagine that. Not an object, not a place, not a moment, but something that simply is. Now, here's a surprising direction physics takes. At the deepest level, many theories reduce reality to relationships. Not things, but relations between things, patterns, structures. Now, here comes the second mini-hook. What if the most fundamental layer of reality is not made of objects, but of relationships that exist without time? Now, let's explore that carefully. Imagine a network, not in space, but abstract. Connections without distance, relations without sequence. In such a structure, nothing moves, nothing changes, and yet everything is defined. Now, here's the subtle leap. If you take such a structure and begin to read it in a certain way, you can extract sequences, you can extract patterns that look like change, that look like time. So time may not be built into the structure itself. It may arise from how the structure is accessed. Now pause again, because this idea is easy to miss. The foundation is not temporal, but it contains the possibility of temporal experience. Now, here comes the third shift. If the universe is based on relationships, then what we call existence may simply be the presence of consistent structure. Not something happening, but something that is logically coherent. Now, here's where it becomes even deeper. Some physicists and mathematicians have suggested that reality itself may be mathematical, not described by mathematics, but made of it, meaning the universe exists because it is a consistent structure. Now, let that settle, because this removes the need for a beginning. Mathematical structures do not start. They simply are. The relationships exist independently of time. Now, here comes the deeper mini-hook. What if the universe exists for the same reason that a mathematical truth exists? Not because it was created, but because it cannot not exist. Now, connect this back to everything we've explored. Time emerges from change. Change emerges from differences. Differences emerge from structure, and structure may exist timelessly. So the chain reverses, not from time to reality, but from timeless structure to time. Now, here's the deeper question, Okan. If structure is fundamental, then why does it give rise to a universe like ours? Why these particular relationships? Why these laws? Now we approach something subtle. Not all structures are equally complex. Some are simple, some are rich enough to support patterns that look like space, time, and matter. And among those, some are capable of supporting observers, systems that can process information, systems that can experience. Now, pause here, because this introduces a quiet selection effect. You find yourself in a universe that can be experienced, because only such a universe can be experienced. Now here comes the deeper shift. The universe may not be tuned for life. Life may appear in the kinds of structures where experience is possible, and those are the only ones that can be noticed. Now we return again to our guiding questions. If time had a beginning, what caused it? If nothing existed before, how did something appear? And now, what is the minimal structure that makes time possible? We're getting very close, because in the next part, we're going to take one final step, not into physics, not into cosmology, but into something even more fundamental, the idea of necessity. What must exist, not by chance, not by cause, but because it cannot be otherwise. Because if we can find that, we may finally approach an answer, not to when time began, but to why a universe with time exists at all. And that answer may not feel like a discovery. It may feel like something that was always there, quietly, waiting, not in time, but beneath it. And now we take one final step inward, not into time, not beyond time, but into something even quieter, necessity. Because after everything we've explored, a pattern has been forming. Time may not be fundamental, space may not be fundamental, matter may not be fundamental. Even causality may not be fundamental. So the question becomes sharper. What is fundamental? What must exist? Not because it was created, not because it emerged, but because it cannot not exist. Pause here, because this is where the idea of why begins to dissolve. We are no longer asking what caused the universe. We are asking what kind of thing does not require a cause at all. Now here comes the first mini shift. In mathematics, there are truths that do not depend on time. They are not discovered at a moment. They do not begin. They simply are. The relationship between numbers, the structure of logic, the consistency of patterns, these are not events. They are necessities. Now, here's the subtle leap. What if reality itself belongs to that category? Not something that happened, but something that must be. Now, let that settle, because it removes the need for a beginning. If something is necessary, then it does not need a cause. It does not need a moment of creation. It exists in the only way it can. Now, here comes the second mini-hook. What if the universe exists, not because it started, but because it is impossible for it not to exist? Now, this idea may feel abstract, but we can approach it slowly. Imagine all possible structures, all consistent systems, all sets of relationships that do not contradict themselves. Some of these structures are simple. Some are incredibly complex, and among them there may be structures that contain everything we observe: space, time, matter. Now here's the key. If a structure is logically consistent, then there is no reason for it not to exist. Because non-existence is not something that applies into abstract structures. They are either consistent or they are not. Now, here comes the third shift. If reality is a consistent structure, then it does not need a beginning, because beginnings only make sense within time, and time is part of the structure itself. Now pause again, because this is where everything folds back. We started with a question: what existed before time? And now we see that the question itself may not apply, because reality may not be something that exists in time, but something from which time emerges. Now, here comes the deeper layer. If reality is necessary, then its properties must also follow necessity. The laws of physics, the structure of space, the behavior of time may not be arbitrary. They may be the only way a consistent, experience-capable structure can exist. Now let that settle, because it suggests something profound where the universe is not one possibility among many. It may be the only possibility that satisfies certain conditions. Now here comes the deeper mini-hook. What if the reason the universe feels real is because it is the only structure in which reality can feel like anything at all? Now connect this back to our earlier ideas. Time emerges so that structure can be experienced. Experience emerges so that information can be processed. And all of it rests on a foundation that does not require time or cause or beginning. Now, here comes the final shift of this part. If necessity is the foundation, and then the question is no longer, when did time begin? But what kind of structure must exist for time to appear inevitably and more quietly? What kind of structure must exist for you to be here, experiencing it? Now sit with that, because in the final part, we will bring everything together, not as an answer, but as a realization. Something that does not resolve the mystery, but transforms it from a question about time into a question about existence itself. And when we reach that point, the original question, what existed before time began, may no longer feel like a mystery to solve, but like a doorway into something deeper, quieter, and strangely familiar. And now we arrive at the end of this journey, but not an ending in time, an ending in perspective. Because the question we started with, what existed before time began, has quietly changed, not once, not twice, but again and again, until it no longer looks the same. At first, it felt like a question about the past, about a moment before everything. But now we see something different. There may have been no before, because time itself may not be the stage on which reality appears. It may be something that appears within reality. And if that's true, then the search for a beginning was never about finding a moment. It was about understanding a structure. Now, pause here, because everything we've explored points toward a quiet realization. Reality may not be something that started, it may be something that simply is, not in time, but beneath it. Now, here comes the final shift. If reality is timeless at its core, and time emerges as a way to experience it, then your life is not moving through a universe. That is being created moment by moment. You are moving through a structure that already exists. Now let that settle, because this idea can feel unsettling at first. It raises questions about choice, about freedom, about meaning. If everything exists, then what does it mean to decide, to act, to choose? But here's where something subtle appears. Even if the structure exists as a whole, your experience of it is still unfolding, still real, still meaningful. Because meaning does not come from whether something is predetermined. It comes from the experience itself, from the way moments connect, from the way awareness moves. Now, think about a story. The ending of a story may already be written, but when you read it, you still feel suspense, you still feel curiosity, you still care, because meaning exists within the experience, not outside it. Now, here comes the final mini hook. What if your life is not meaningful because it is uncertain, but because it is experienced? Now, take a breath, because this brings us back to something very simple. You are here, in this moment, aware, experiencing, and whatever the ultimate nature of time may be, that experience is real. Not because it is the only moment that exists, but because it is the moment you are connected to. Now, here comes the deeper realization. The mystery of time was never just about the universe. It was about the relationship between structure and experience, between what is and what is felt. Now let's return one final time to our three guiding questions. If time had a beginning, what caused it? Perhaps nothing caused it. Perhaps it emerged, inevitably, from deeper structure. If nothing existed before, how did something appear? Perhaps nothing was never possible. Perhaps something must always exist. And if time is not fundamental, what lies beneath it? Not emptiness, not darkness, but something quieter. Structure, relationship, possibility. Now pause, because at this point, the question we began with has transformed, not into an answer, but into something else. A different way of seeing. Instead of asking, what existed before time? You might now ask, what kind of reality allows time to appear at all? And perhaps, even more quietly, kind of reality allows me to experience it? Now sit with that, because this is where the mystery becomes personal. Not something far away, not something abstract, but something present, right here, in your awareness, in the feeling of this moment. Now, here's something gentle to leave you with. You don't need to solve this mystery. You don't need to reach the final answer, because the truth is, this may not be a mystery that can be solved. It may be a mystery that can only be experienced. And perhaps that is enough. If this journey helped you feel something different, even for a moment, a quiet sense of wonder, a shift in perspective, then take a second, a moment to stay with that feeling. And if you'd like to continue exploring these kinds of ideas slowly, gently, without rush, you can support this space, a like, a quiet subscribe. It helps these kinds of conversations continue to exist. And if you want to go even deeper, there is another question waiting, one that feels even more unsettling and strangely connected to everything we've explored, not about time, not about the beginning, but about the end, not the end of the universe, but the end of experience itself. Because if time is not fundamental, what happens when experience stops? That's where we'll go next. But for now, just rest here for a moment, not in the past, not in the future, but in this quiet, unfolding experience that we call time.